All right, so today we're diving into Think Again by Adam Grant.
A fascinating book.
Yeah, and looks like you sent over a ton of excerpts.
Yeah, it's a really thought-provoking book, I think.
Yeah, and I know we both found ourselves like rethinking some of our own, long-held beliefs and assumptions just from reading it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's what we want to do today. We're going to unpack some of the key ideas and insights from Think Again.
Yeah. See if we can learn how to become better rethinkers.
Exactly, because I think we all get stuck in those mental ruts sometimes,
Mm.
where we're not even aware of our own biases or how they're shaping our thinking.
Yeah, totally. And Grant does such a good job of kind of like pulling back the curtain on those hidden biases, and then he gives us these practical strategies for overcoming them.
I love that he provides a framework. Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
Okay, so where do we even begin with all this?
Well, Grant starts with this brilliant analogy. He compares our thinking modes to a preacher, a prosecutor, a politician, and a scientist.
Whoa. Okay.
Yeah, it's an interesting mix, right?
Yeah.
But he makes the case that while the first three can be useful in some contexts,
Yeah.
they can actually hold us back when it comes to updating our beliefs.
Okay. I'm intrigued and unpack that a little bit more.
Okay, so think about it when you're trying to convince someone of something.
Like trying to convince someone to try a new restaurant.
Exactly. You're in preacher mode, right? You're
Yep.
passionate. You're advocating for your beliefs.
Oh, absolutely.
But are you really open to hearing their counter-arguments or their different perspective?
Probably not so much.
Yeah. And then there's prosecutor mode.
Oh, boy.
So this is when you're arguing with someone and you're just looking for flaws in their logic.
Oh, yeah.
You're not really trying to understand their perspective. You're just trying to win the argument.
I have been guilty of that one.
Oh, yeah, me too. And then there's politician mode.
Oh.
This is where you're kind of shaping your views based on who you're talking to.
Oh, yeah, to get approval.
To gain approval, exactly.
Yeah.
So you might say one thing to your boss and then something completely different to your friends.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Just to fit in or to, advance your own interests.
Totally. Okay, so those three, preacher, prosecutor, politician, they definitely sound familiar.
Right.
But where does the scientist mindset fit into all of this?
Okay, so this is the one Grant says we should all strive for.
Okay. I'm all ears.
The scientist approaches thinking with curiosity and humility.
Humility, yes. Love that.
Right. They're always open to new evidence, and they're willing to adjust their hypotheses based on what they learn.
Okay, that sounds ideal.
Right. They don't see being wrong as a failure,
Mm-hmm.
but as a stepping stone to a better understanding.
Okay. I
Right.
love that. Yeah, so it's not about being right all the time.
Oh.
It's about constantly learning and refining your understanding of the world.
Exactly. And I think we all have moments where we embody these different mindsets. Sometimes we're the preacher, sometimes we're the prosecutor, sometimes we're the politician.
Right.
But the goal is to try to bring that scientist mindset into as many situations as possible.
Okay, so how do we do that? How do we actually shift from, say, preacher mode to scientist mode?
Well, it's not always easy.
Yeah?
But Grant argues that a big part of rethinking is recognizing our own mental blindness.
Mental blindness.
Yeah, and he uses some really interesting cases of patients who suffered brain injuries
Okay.
that left them blind, but they were completely unaware of it.
Whoa, wait. So they were mentally blind to their physical blindness.
Exactly. Their brains were essentially filling in the gaps, creating this false perception of reality.
How is that even possible?
It's pretty wild, right? And Grant uses this as a metaphor for our own cognitive biases. We can be blind to our own flawed assumptions and outdated beliefs.
Okay, that's a little unsettling.
Yeah.
But I can see how it connects to rethinking. If we're not even aware of our blind spots, how can we challenge them?
Right. And one of the biggest culprits is the Dunning-Kruger effect,
Oh, yeah.
which you've probably heard of.
Yeah, that's one where incompetent people are often the most overconfident. Yeah.
Exactly. It's like that friend who thinks they're an amazing singer but can't carry a tune to save their life.
Oh, yeah, we all know that person.
Yeah, so it's this weird paradox where a lack of competence actually masks itself in overconfidence.
Interesting.
Yeah, people with low ability in a particular area often lack the skills to accurately assess their own performance.
Right.
So they end up wildly overestimating their abilities.
So basically, the less you know, the more confident you are.
Pretty much, yeah. And this goes beyond karaoke mishaps.
I would hope so.
Yeah. Grant highlights a study where economists evaluated company performance.
Okay.
And it turned out that managers wildly overestimated their own contributions to their company's success.
Oh.
Their self-ratings were completely out of sync with the actual data.
So even in high-stakes situations, the Dunning-Kruger effect can be at play.
Yeah, it's Pretty powerful force, and it makes you wonder how often we're overestimating our own abilities in other areas of our lives.
That's a good point. Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
definitely rethinking my own confidence levels in certain areas right now.
Well, and that's a healthy response.
Yeah.
Recognizing that we all have blind spots
Yeah.
and that we might not be as skilled or knowledgeable as we think we are.
Right.
That's a crucial first step towards rethinking.
Okay, so if the Dunning-Kruger effect is the dark side of confidence, what's the flip side?
Well, Grant talks about this sweet spot called confident humility.
Confident humility. Okay, I like that.
It's not about lacking confidence, but it's about having the humility to acknowledge that you might not have all the answers right now.
Hmm.
It's about being secure enough in yourself to be open to new information
Okay.
and to admit when you're wrong.
So it's like embracing that beginner's mind mentality.
Exactly, that sense of wonder and curiosity that pushes us to keep learning and growing.
Yeah.
And that leads us to another fascinating concept that Grant explores,
Oh.
one that often gets a bad rap: imposter syndrome.
Imposter syndrome. But isn't that a purely negative thing, feeling like you're a fraud, that you don't deserve your success?
Yeah, that's the common perception.
Mm-hmm.
But Grant actually flips the script. He argues that imposter syndrome, when it's not debilitating, can actually be a source of motivation and learning.
Hold on. So feeling like an imposter can actually help you succeed.
Yeah, it sounds counterintuitive, right? Well, hear me out.
Okay, I'm listening.
Grant outlines 3 potential benefits of imposter syndrome.
3 benefits.
Yeah. First, it can motivate us to work harder.
Mm-hmm.
If we feel like we have something to prove, we're less likely to become complacent.
Okay, that makes sense.
Second, it can make us work smarter.
Okay.
When we doubt our own knowledge, we're more likely to question assumptions, double-check our work, and think outside the box.
Yeah, I can see that.
Right? And third, it can make us better learners.
Okay.
If we feel like we don't have all the answers, we're more likely to seek out feedback, ask for help, and be open to new perspectives.
So it's like turning that fear of being exposed as a fraud into a driving force for growth.
Exactly. It's about channeling that energy into a positive direction.
I like that. Yeah.
And Grant points out that this sense of confident humility, whether it stems from imposter syndrome or a genuine desire to learn, is a powerful antidote to something he calls the totalitarian ego.
Totalitarian ego. Oh, that sounds a bit intense.
It's a great term, isn't it?
Yeah.
It refers to that inner voice we all have that tries to protect our egos at all costs.
Oh, yeah.
Even if it means clinging to beliefs that are outdated or just plain wrong.
We've all got that inner critic.
Yeah, it's like having a mental dictator who censors any information that challenges our cherished convictions.
So it's about becoming aware of that inner dictator.
Right.
And learning how to resist its tyranny.
Exactly.
But how do we break free from its grasp?
Well, one key strategy that Grant emphasizes is detaching our opinions from our identities.
Okay. Detaching our opinions from our identities.
Yeah, it's about recognizing that our beliefs are not who we are.
Mm-hmm.
They're simply thoughts we have.
That's an interesting distinction.
Yeah, so it's about separating our sense of self from the ideas we hold. Allowing ourselves the space to change our minds without feeling like we're losing a part of ourselves.
Yeah, like our beliefs can evolve without threatening our sense of self.
Exactly. And this reminds me of a rather extreme example that Grant uses to highlight the dangers of unshakable conviction.
Oh, boy. Okay, I'm ready.
Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber.
Oh, wow. Okay, that's taken it to a whole other level, but I'm guessing there's a lesson to be learned here.
Definitely. Even if it's from a disturbing source.
Yeah.
It wasn't just the content of his manifesto that was disturbing,
Right.
but his absolute certainty, his complete lack of doubt.
Hmm.
And Grant points out that this unwavering conviction, this inability to consider alternative perspectives, is a common thread among extremists.
Oh, that's scary.
Yeah, it's a chilling reminder of what can happen when we become so attached to our beliefs that we refuse to question them.
So how do we avoid falling into that trap? It seems like having strong convictions is important.
Mm-hmm.
But how do we balance that with the need to be open-minded and willing to change our minds?
It's a delicate balance, for sure.
Oh.
But one strategy Grant suggests is actively seeking out information that challenges our views.
Actively seeking out information that challenges our views. Okay, so it's not just about being open to new information when it comes our way.
Right.
It's about actively seeking it out.
Exactly. Instead of surrounding ourselves with people who agree with us,
Yeah.
we should intentionally engage with those who hold different perspectives.
Oh, okay, so bursting those filter bubbles and stepping outside of our echo chambers.
Exactly.
But that can be tough. Where do we even begin to find these dissenting voices?
Well, Grant introduces this concept of a challenge network.
Challenge network. What is that, and how do I sign up?
Okay, so think of it as a group of people you trust to push your thinking, to point out your blind spots, and to help you see things from different angles.
Okay.
These aren't your typical yes men or cheerleaders.
Gotcha.
They're the people who are willing to disagree with you, to engage in constructive conflict, and to hold you accountable for your reasoning.
So my own personal devil's advocates.
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay, I love that idea, but it also sounds a little terrifying. How do you go about building this kind of network?
Well, Grant says the ideal members of a challenge network are surprisingly disagreeable.
Wait, you're telling me I need to surround myself with disagreeable people?
Now, hold on. Disagreeable doesn't necessarily mean unpleasant or rude.
Okay.
In this context,
Yeah.
it refers to people who are comfortable questioning the status quo, pushing back against conventional wisdom, and challenging your assumptions.
So it's not about seeking out conflict for conflict's sake,
Right.
but about finding people who are willing to engage in thoughtful debate
Exactly.
and help you stress test your ideas.
Yeah, and they're not doing it to tear you down.
Yeah.
They're doing it because they care enough about you and your ideas
Right.
to engage in rigorous debate.
Okay. Yeah.
You know, they see disagreement as a sign of respect, a way of honoring your perspective by taking it seriously enough to challenge it.
Okay. Now that you put it that way, it makes a lot of sense.
Right.
It's definitely making me rethink how I approach disagreements in my own life.
Yeah.
I tend to get defensive pretty easily,
Right.
but maybe there's a way to turn those tense moments into opportunities for growth.
Absolutely. And to show us how it's done,
Yeah.
Grant introduces us to the world of champion debater, Harish Natarajan.
Oh, yeah, I remember reading about him. He's the guy who debated a computer, right?
That's him.
Tell me more. What can a world-class debater teach us about rethinking?
Well, what's fascinating about Harish is that he views debate not as a war, but as a dance.
That's an interesting analogy.
Yeah.
I'm picturing something a bit more graceful than your typical heated argument.
Definitely. He approaches debate as a collaborative process,
Okay.
a way of exploring different ideas together and arriving at a more nuanced understanding.
I love that.
Yeah, he's not trying to crush his opponent.
Right.
He's trying to find a rhythm, a shared understanding,
Yeah.
even in the midst of disagreement.
And he actually debated a computer. What happened there?
It was a fascinating event. He went head-to-head with an AI system that had been trained on millions of arguments.
Oh, wow.
And even though the computer had access to this massive amount of data, it was Harish who won over the audience.
Wow, that's impressive. But how did he manage to out-debate a machine? Was it just his charm?
Charm might have played a role, but Grant highlights some specific strategies that Harish used,
Okay.
and they offer valuable lessons for all of us, even if we're not facing off against AI.
All right, I'm ready to learn from the master.
Okay, so first he focused on finding common ground.
Common ground, okay.
Yeah, instead of launching straight into an attack on his opponent's position, he would start by identifying areas of agreement,
Okay.
creating a more collaborative atmosphere from the get-go.
So it's about building bridges instead of walls.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
hard to have a productive conversation when you're constantly on the defensive.
For sure. So what else did he do?
He also made a conscious effort to avoid what Grant calls defend attack spirals.
Defend attack spirals. Okay, what are those?
So when his opponent made a point,
Okay.
instead of immediately refuting it,
Yeah.
he would first acknowledge the validity of their argument and then offer a counterpoint.
That's a really interesting approach. It's like saying, I hear you and I respect your perspective,
Right.
but here's another way to think about it.
Exactly.
It seems like a much more respectful and nuanced way to engage in debate.
It is, and by avoiding that back and forth of attack and defense,
Yeah.
he created a more open and productive conversation.
Right.
And this ties back to Grant's broader point about the importance of creating a culture of debate, where disagreement is seen as a valuable tool for learning and growth.
It's like that challenge network idea,
Totally.
creating a space where you can safely disagree and learn from each other.
Exactly. And that's where we're going to pick up in part 2 of this deep dive.
Oh, can't wait. I'm already feeling my mind expanding.
Me too.
Huh.
This is fun.
All right, we'll be back soon with more from Think Again. Okay, so we left off talking about the importance of creating a culture of debate.
Yeah, where disagreement is seen as a valuable tool for learning and growth.
But let's be real, some disagreements are tougher than others. How do you apply these principles when you're dealing with people who hold views that are fundamentally different from your own or even harmful?
That's a great question, and it's where Grant's discussion of stereotypes and prejudice comes in, and he uses this really captivating story of Daryl Davis.
Daryl Davis? Okay, I'm not familiar.
So Daryl Davis is a black musician who has done something truly extraordinary.
Okay.
He's befriended members of the Ku Klux Klan.
He befriended KKK members.
Yeah.
I'm having trouble wrapping my head around that. What was his motivation?
Well, it might seem counterintuitive,
Yeah.
but Daryl believes that the best way to combat hate is through understanding.
Okay.
He's convinced that by engaging in open and honest conversations, he can help people rethink their prejudices.
That's a bold approach, to say the least, and it seems like it's actually worked for him.
It has. Daryl has helped numerous KKK members leave the organization.
Wow.
And he credits his success to his willingness to listen, to ask questions, and to find common ground, even with people who hold views that are diametrically opposed to his own.
That's really powerful. So it's not about trying to convert them or force them to change their minds overnight,
No.
but about building relationships and creating a space for dialogue.
Exactly. And this approach aligns with Grant's emphasis on destabilizing stereotypes.
Okay, destabilizing stereotypes.
Yeah, he argues that one of the most effective ways to reduce prejudice is to help people see the arbitrariness of their beliefs,
Okay.
to expose the cracks in those rigid categories we put people in.
So instead of just telling people that their stereotypes are wrong, it's about helping them see for themselves how those beliefs might have been shaped by their upbringing, their environment, their experiences.
Exactly. And Grant suggests a fascinating tool for achieving this counterfactual thinking.
Counterfactual thinking, that sounds a bit like science fiction.
It's simpler than it sounds. It basically involves asking what-if questions to help people imagine alternative realities.
Okay.
For example, Grant suggests asking someone, how would your views differ if you were born a different race? Or, what opinions would you hold if you'd been raised in a different culture?
Oh, I see. So it's about nudging people to step outside of their own limited perspective and consider how their beliefs might have been shaped by different circumstances. It's like a mental exercise in empathy.
Exactly. It's about helping them see that their stereotypes aren't inherent truths, but rather products of their environment and experiences, and by recognizing that it opens up the possibility of change.
It reminds me of that famous quote, "A mind that is stretched by a new experience can never go back to its old dimensions."
I love that it perfectly captures the transformative potential of rethinking, and counterfactual thinking isn't just limited to stereotypes. It could be applied to all sorts of situations.
Oh, I'd love to hear an example. How could I use counterfactual thinking in my own life?
Okay, well, imagine you're grappling with a major career decision.
Okay.
Instead of just focusing on your current options, you could ask yourself, what if I had taken a different path earlier in my career? What if I had majored in something else? What if I had said yes to that opportunity I was afraid of?
Okay. Yeah.
By exploring these alternative scenarios, you might gain new insights into what you truly value and what kind of work would be most fulfilling.
So it's about using our imaginations to break free from the constraints of our current thinking and open ourselves up to new possibilities.
Exactly. And speaking of opening up possibilities, Grant introduces another powerful tool for rethinking that I think you'll find interesting: motivational interviewing.
Motivational interviewing I've heard of. That isn't it a technique therapists use to help people overcome addictions?
That's one application, but it's actually much broader than that.
No.
Motivational interviewing is a communication style that can be used in any situation where you're trying to help someone change their thinking or behavior, whether it's quitting smoking, adopting a healthier lifestyle, or even just reconsidering a long-held belief.
So it's not about forcing change on someone, but about guiding them to discover their own reasons for change?
Precisely, it's about asking open-ended questions,
Okay.
listening empathically, and helping them explore their own ambivalence, their own reasons for wanting to change, and their reasons for resisting change.
It seems like a very respectful approach. You're treating the person as an equal partner in the conversation, not trying to impose your views on them.
Exactly. And Grant shares a really compelling example of this in action: the vaccine whisperer.
Vaccine whisper.
Yeah, doctor who uses motivational interviewing to help parents overcome their vaccine hesitancy.
Wow, that's so timely.
Yeah.
So instead of lecturing parents about the science of vaccines, this doctor takes a different approach.
Right. He starts by genuinely listening to their concerns, acknowledging their fears and beliefs, and respecting their right to make their own choices. He doesn't dismiss their concerns or try to argue with them.
So it's about validating their feelings and creating a safe space for them to express their doubts, even if those doubts are based on misinformation or unfounded fears.
Exactly. And once he understands their perspective, he can start to gently guide them toward a more informed decision.
Okay.
He might share some information about the safety and efficacy of vaccines, but he does it in a way that respects their autonomy and empowers them to make their own choices.
This approach seems so much more effective than simply trying to force people to change their minds. You can't just logic someone into changing deeply held beliefs, especially when emotions are involved.
It's true, when we feel pressured or judged, we're more likely to dig in our heels and resist new information.
Yeah.
But when we feel heard and respected, we're much more open to considering different perspectives.
It's about appealing to their intrinsic motivation, helping them connect with their own values and goals rather than relying on external pressure or authority.
Exactly. And this is where Grant's distinction between sustained talk and change talk comes in.
Sustain talk and change talk. Okay, I'm not familiar with those terms.
So sustained talk is when someone is expressing reasons to maintain the status quo,
Okay.
to stick with their current beliefs or behaviors. For example, a parent might say, I'm worried about the potential side effects of vaccines, or I've heard the vaccines can cause autism. That's sustained talk.
Okay, got it. And change talk, I'm guessing, is when they start to express reasons to change,
Right.
even if it's just a glimmer of doubt or a flicker of curiosity.
Exactly. The parent might say, I want to do what's best for my child's health, or I'm concerned about the risks of my child getting measles. Those are examples of change talk.
Gotcha.
And the skilled motivational interviewer can help tip the scales towards change talk by asking the right questions and creating a supportive environment.
It's like helping them connect their values, like protecting their child's health, with the actions that align with those values, like getting them vaccinated.
Precisely. And this isn't just about changing someone else's mind. Grant emphasizes that motivational interviewing can also be a powerful tool for self-reflection.
Oh, that's interesting. How so?
Well, by using the same principles of open-ended questions, empathetic listening, and self-discovery,
Okay.
we can apply motivational interviewing to our own thinking processes.
Interesting.
We can become our own coaches, guiding ourselves toward greater self-awareness and more informed decisions.
So it's like having an internal dialogue with yourself, exploring your own ambivalence, your own reasons for holding on to certain beliefs or behaviors, and your own reasons for wanting to change.
Exactly. It's about becoming more aware of our own internal landscape, those conflicting thoughts and feelings that often drive our decisions.
Right.
And this awareness can help us break free from rigid patterns of thinking and embrace more flexible and adaptive approaches.
This is really making me think about how I approach change in my own life. I tend to get stuck in my ways, but maybe with a little motivational interviewing, both with myself and others, I can become more open to new possibilities.
That's the spirit. And speaking of being open to new possibilities, Grant highlights another cognitive trap that can hinder our ability to rethink effectively: binary bias.
Binary bias. I haven't heard of that one before. Fill me in.
Okay, so it's the tendency to see the world in black and white,
Okay.
to oversimplify complex issues into two opposing sides. We fall into the trap of thinking that if you're not with us, you're against us.
Ah, I see. So instead of embracing nuance and acknowledging the shades of gray, we create these false dichotomies that limit our thinking and prevent us from seeing the full picture.
Exactly, and this binary bias can be incredibly destructive, especially when it comes to polarizing issues like climate change, gun control, or political ideologies.
Right.
It prevents us from having productive conversations, finding common ground, and working together to solve complex problems.
It's like we're constantly drawing battle lines, creating these artificial divisions that make it impossible to have a civil and productive conversation.
Precisely. And to illustrate this point, Grant highlights a study that explored how people responded to different framings of the gun control debate.
Okay, tell me about this study. I'm curious to see how framing influenced people's responses. What did they find?
So the researchers presented two versions of an article on gun control to participants.
Okay.
The first version presented the issue as a black and white debate, focusing on the opposing viewpoints of gun rights advocates and gun control proponents.
Okay.
The second version, however, framed the issue as a complex problem with multiple perspectives and potential solutions.
And I'm guessing that how the issue was framed had a significant impact on how people responded.
Participants who read the more complex version of the article were more likely to acknowledge the validity of opposing viewpoints,
Okay.
to see the issue in shades of gray, and to be open to considering a wider range of solutions.
So it seems like framing the issue as a multifaceted problem rather than a binary choice can help people break free from that black and white thinking.
Exactly. And Grant argues that this applies to all sorts of polarizing issues,
Yeah.
whether it's climate change, immigration, healthcare, or anything else that tends to get people riled up. When we move beyond those simplistic either framings, we create space for more nuanced and productive conversations.
This is making me think about how often we try to reduce complex issues to sound bites and slogans. It's like we're losing the ability to engage in thoughtful and nuanced discussions.
It's true, and that's why Grant is such an advocate for embracing complexity.
Mm-hmm.
He argues that it's not about finding the right answer, but about expanding our thinking, recognizing the limitations of our knowledge, and being open to multiple perspectives.
So it's about cultivating that intellectual humility, that willingness to admit that we don't have all the answers and that the world is full of shades of gray.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that complexity is not something to be feared,
Right.
but rather something to be embraced. It's in the messy, nuanced spaces between the extremes that we often find the most creative and innovative solutions.
This is giving me a lot to think about. It's challenging, but I can see how embracing complexity could lead to a more enriching and ultimately more productive approach to life.
And speaking of challenging assumptions, Grant takes on a topic that's particularly relevant to anyone who's ever sat through a boring lecture:
Yeah.
the limitations of traditional lecturing as a method of learning.
Okay, this is interesting. I've always been a fan of good lectures, but I'm open to hearing Grant's critique. What's his main argument against the traditional lecture format?
Well, he acknowledges that lectures can be effective for conveying information,
Okay.
but he argues that they often fall short when it comes to promoting deeper learning and critical thinking.
Okay.
It's the difference between passively absorbing information and actively engaging with it, grappling with concepts, and applying what you're learning to real-world problems.
So it's about moving beyond that sage on the stage model of education, where the teacher simply transmits knowledge to the students, and toward a more active and participatory approach.
Exactly. And to really drive this point home, Grant shares a study that compared the effectiveness of lecturing versus active learning in a physics class.
Okay, I'm always up for a good study. Tell me more about what they found.
So the study involved two groups of students who attended sessions on two different physics topics: statics and fluids.
Okay.
One group received a lecture on statics and an active learning session on fluids, while the other group had the opposite experience.
And I'm assuming the active learning sessions involved more hands-on activities, problem solving, and group discussions, while the lectures were more traditional presentations of information.
You got it. And what's fascinating is that when students were tested on their understanding of the material, those who participated in the active learning sessions significantly outperformed those who received lectures.
So it seems like simply listening to a lecture, even if it's delivered by a brilliant professor, isn't always the most effective way to learn.
It's not that lectures are inherently bad, but they're just one tool in the learning toolbox.
Right.
Active learning, on the other hand, forces students to engage with the material on a deeper level, to grapple with concepts, to apply what they're learning to real-world problems. It's about doing, not just listening.
And I'm guessing this principle applies to learning beyond the classroom as well, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Whether we're trying to master a new skill, understand a complex issue, or simply expand our knowledge, active engagement is key.
Oh, wow.
It's about seeking out opportunities to apply what we're learning, to experiment, to get feedback, to make mistakes and learn from them.
It's about treating learning as an ongoing process of discovery rather than a one-time download of information.
Precisely. And to really embody this philosophy of active learning, Grant introduces us to a remarkable teacher named Ron Berger.
Oh, I love hearing about inspiring teachers. What's so special about Ron Berger's approach to education?
Well, Ron is a former elementary school teacher who believes that the purpose of education is not just to fill students' heads with facts, but to teach them how to think critically and creatively.
Good.
He wants to equip them with those lifelong learning skills, those habits of mind that will serve them well beyond the classroom.
So it's about fostering those essential skills like critical thinking, problem solving, collaboration, and communication. Those are the skills that will truly prepare students for the complexities of the 21st century.
Exactly. And one of the key principles Ron emphasizes is the importance of revision.
Okay, revision.
Yeah, he encourages his students to view their work as a process, not a product,
Okay.
to embrace mistakes as opportunities for learning, and to constantly strive for improvement.
So instead of aiming for perfection on the first try, it's about embracing that iterative process of drafting, getting feedback, and refining your work. It's about developing that growth mindset, that belief that you can always improve with effort and feedback.
You nailed it.
Yeah.
And Ron takes us a step further by creating a culture of critique in his classroom.
A culture of critique that sounds intense. How does that work in an elementary school setting?
It is intense, but in a really positive way.
Huh.
Every week, Ron's students participate in critique sessions where they provide each other with feedback on their work.
Okay.
They learn how to give and receive constructive criticism, to be specific and kind in their feedback, to focus on the work rather than the person, and to avoid personal attacks or judgments.
So it's like creating a mini challenge network within the classroom where students learn how to respectfully disagree, to identify areas for improvement, and to help each other grow.
Precisely. And what's remarkable is that this culture of critique actually leads to a higher quality of work.
Hmm.
Because students are constantly getting feedback, they're able to identify areas for improvement and revise their work accordingly. They learn to embrace the iterative process of learning and to see mistakes as valuable stepping stones.
It's amazing how a simple shift in mindset from focusing on perfection to embracing revision can have such a profound impact on learning. It makes me think about how often we as adults get stuck in our routines clinging to those best practices without questioning whether they're still the best.
That's a great point. And Grant suggests that instead of looking for best practices, we should be searching for better practices.
Okay, better practices.
Yeah, it's about constantly seeking ways to improve, to experiment, and to adapt to changing circumstances.
So it's about having that growth mindset, that belief that we can always learn and grow no matter how experienced or successful we become.
Exactly. And this brings us to another important aspect of rethinking, that Grant explores the importance of process accountability.
Process accountability.
Mhm.
I'm intrigued. Tell me more about what that means.
So it's about evaluating how decisions are made, not just focusing on the outcomes.
Yep.
It's about recognizing that even a good outcome can be the result of a flawed process,
Right.
and that even a bad outcome can sometimes stem from a sound process.
So it's about looking beyond the surface and examining the thinking that went into the decision, even if it ultimately led to a successful result.
Exactly. And Grant uses a really powerful example to illustrate this point, NASA's near-fatal spacewalk.
Oh, wow. That's a high-stakes example. Tell me more about what happened.
So during a spacewalk, astronaut Luca Parmitano's helmet began to fill with water,
Oh, no.
putting his life in danger.
That's terrifying.
It was the crew on the ground scrambled to get him back inside the International Space Station safely, but it was a very close call.
I can only imagine the stress and panic that everyone must have felt.
It was a harrowing experience for everyone involved, and afterward, NASA conducted a thorough investigation to understand what went wrong.
Okay.
And what they discovered was that the root cause of the problem wasn't a technical malfunction,
Mm.
but a series of flawed decisions
Mm.
that led to a dangerous situation.
So even though they were able to rescue the astronaut, they realized they had dodged a bullet.
Yeah,
And if they didn't rethink their decision-making processes, it could happen again potentially with even more dire consequences.
exactly. And this is where process accountability comes in.
Okay.
It's about creating a culture where people are encouraged to not only focus on results, but to also examine how those results were achieved.
Okay.
To ask questions like, what assumptions did we make? What information did we miss? How could we have made a better decision, even if the outcome was ultimately successful?
It's about learning from mistakes, even when those mistakes don't lead to catastrophic outcomes.
Precisely because a culture of process accountability encourages continuous learning and improvement.
Yeah.
It creates an environment where people feel safe to speak up, to challenge assumptions, and to propose new ideas without fear of being punished for making a mistake.
That makes sense. It ties back to that idea of psychological safety that we discussed earlier. It's hard to rethink and innovate if you're constantly worried about making a mistake or being penalized for challenging the status quo.
You're absolutely right. And when psychological safety is combined with process accountability, you create what Grant calls a learning culture.
So a learning culture is where rethinking truly thrives.
Precisely. It's an environment where growth is the core value,
I love that.
where people are encouraged to embrace challenges, and where learning from mistakes is seen as essential for success.
It's so important to create that kind of environment.
It is. It's about creating a culture where people are constantly asking, how can we do this better, even when things are going well?
It reminds me of that quote by Jeff Bezos. If you double the number of experiments you do per year, you're going to double your inventiveness.
That's a great example. A learning culture is all about embracing experimentation, recognizing that failure is often a necessary stepping stone to success.
It's about embracing the journey, not just the destination.
Exactly. And with that in mind, let's shift our focus to the final chapter of Grant's book, where he challenges us to rethink our life plans.
Ooh, this is getting personal. I'm ready to do some soul searching. Tell me more about what Grant has to say about rethinking our lives.
Well, he starts by discussing the concept of identity foreclosure.
Identity foreclosure, that sounds a bit ominous. What does that mean?
So it refers to the tendency to cling too tightly to early career aspirations or life goals.
Okay.
even when they no longer align with our values or interests.
Right.
It's like we've closed ourselves off to other possibilities because we're so attached to this vision of who we're supposed to be based on what we decided when we were younger or what others expected of us.
So it's about recognizing that who we are and what we want out of life can evolve over time, that we don't have to be defined by the choices we made in our teens or early 20s.
Exactly. And Grant argues that this clinging to outdated identities can lead to a lot of unhappiness and unfulfillment,
Mhm.
especially when those early aspirations were based on limited information or societal expectations
Mm.
rather than a deep understanding of ourselves.
It makes me think about how much pressure we put on young people to figure out their life's purpose. At such a young age, we expect them to choose a career path and stick with it, when in reality, they're still figuring out who they are and what they want out of life.
It's true, and Grant encourages us to view work as actions we take, not fixed identities.
I love that distinction. So it's not about saying I am a doctor or I am a lawyer, but rather I'm someone who heals people or I'm someone who fights for justice. It's about focusing on the impact we want to have on the world rather than getting caught up in labels and titles.
Exactly. Because when we define ourselves by our actions rather than our job titles, we create more space for exploration, growth, and change.
Yeah.
We allow ourselves the freedom to evolve and adapt as our interests and values shift over time.
It's like giving ourselves permission to change our minds, to try new things, to pivot when something isn't working without feeling like we're betraying some core part of ourselves.
Precisely. And this reminds me of an anecdote Grant shares about one of his students, Ryan, who initially regretted becoming a neurosurgeon.
Really? I would think that being a neurosurgeon would be a dream job for a lot of people. It's such a prestigious and intellectually demanding career.
You would think so, right? But Ryan eventually realized that the long hours, the intense pressure, and the bureaucratic hurdles weren't a good fit for his personality and values.
Okay.
He was miserable even though he was succeeding in a field that many would envy.
So it's a reminder that even those dream jobs aren't always what they're cracked up to be, and that it's okay to change course even if you've invested a lot of time and energy into a particular path.
Exactly. And Grant encourages us to see work as a way to express our values, our skills, and our passions,
Hmm.
rather than as a fixed identity that defines us.
That's such a freeing perspective. It takes the pressure off of finding that one perfect career path and allows us to explore different options, to experiment, and to find what truly resonates with us, even if it changes over time.
And to really challenge our assumptions about what a fulfilling life looks like, Grant ends the book with a discussion of what he calls the happiness trap.
Ooh, that sounds intriguing. Tell me more about this happiness trap. What is it, and how do we avoid falling into it?
Okay, so it's the idea that the relentless pursuit of happiness as a primary life goal can actually backfire.
Wait, what you're telling me that focusing on happiness can make us less happy? How is that possible?
There are a few possible explanations. One is that when we're constantly striving for happiness, we become hyper-focused on evaluating our lives rather than simply experiencing them.
Right.
We're so busy analyzing our emotions and searching for sources of joy that we miss out on the simple pleasures of everyday life. We become so obsessed with feeling happy that we forget to actually live.
It's like we're trying to force happiness rather than allowing it to emerge organically from our experiences. Like we're so busy chasing after it that we trip over all the joy that's right in front of us.
Exactly. And another explanation is that when we fixate on happiness,
Yeah.
we tend to overemphasize pleasure at the expense of purpose.
Hmm.
We prioritize those activities that provide immediate gratification,
Okay.
but neglect those that give our lives meaning and significance.
So it's about finding that balance between pursuing those things that make us feel good in the moment and those that contribute to a greater sense of purpose and fulfillment in the long run.
It's not that happiness is bad, it's just that it shouldn't be our sole focus.
Right.
It's about finding that deeper sense of purpose and meaning that gives our lives direction and significance, even when those pursuits aren't always easy or pleasurable.
It makes sense. It's easy to get caught up in the pursuit of pleasure and comfort. But ultimately, it's those things that challenge us, that push us outside of our comfort zones, that give our lives a sense of meaning.
Exactly. And Grant highlights research suggesting that meaning is actually a more sustainable source of well-being than happiness.
Okay.
People who find their lives meaningful tend to be more resilient, more engaged, and more satisfied overall, even in the face of adversity.
That's really encouraging. So it's not about denying ourselves pleasure or joy, but about recognizing that a life solely focused on those things might ultimately leave us feeling empty and unfulfilled.
Precisely. And to illustrate this point, Grant shares a story about a student who was considering transferring colleges because she wasn't happy at her current school.
I can relate to that. College can be a really tough transition, especially if you're not finding your tribe or feeling connected to the community. It's easy to think that the solution is to change your environment, but sometimes the answer lies within.
That's exactly what Grant realized.
Okay.
His initial advice to this student was to consider transferring to a school that might be a better fit. But then he had a realization.
What was it? I'm on the edge of my seat.
He realized that instead of focusing on changing her surroundings, she could try changing her actions.
Ugh.
Instead of uprooting her entire life, she could try to create a more fulfilling experience within her current environment.
So it's about taking ownership of your own happiness rather than waiting for external circumstances to change.
Exactly. And that's what she ended up doing. She started organizing weekly coffee chats with classmates,
Oh, nice.
invited people over for tea, and eventually formed a close-knit group of friends who shared her interests and values.
It's a beautiful example of how we can often find happiness and fulfillment by creating our own micro communities, even within larger environments that might not feel like a perfect fit.
It's a powerful reminder that we have more agency than we often realize. We might not be able to control everything that happens to us, but we can choose how we respond. And we can take proactive steps to shape our experiences and create a more fulfilling life, even within the constraints of our current circumstances.
Yeah, this is giving me a lot to reflect on. It's so easy to get caught up in the mindset of, if only I had a different job, a different relationship, a different life, then I would be happy. But what Grant is saying is that we have the power to create happiness and meaning right where we are right now.
You got it. And that's really the essence of Grant's message in Think Again. It's a call to action, to become more active agents in our own lives, to embrace rethinking as a lifelong practice, and to cultivate those habits of mind that will allow us to continuously learn, grow, and adapt to a changing world.
It's about recognizing that we all have blind spots, that our knowledge is always incomplete, and that the most important skill we can develop is the ability to think again, to question our assumptions, to be open to new information, and to embrace the possibility that we might be wrong.
It's about letting go of that need to be right all the time and embracing the beauty of not knowing.
This has been such a thought-provoking conversation. I feel like I have a whole new toolkit for navigating the complexities of life and for becoming a more open-minded and adaptable person.
Me too. It's been a pleasure diving into these ideas with you.
So to wrap things up, what's one key takeaway that you hope our listeners will take with them from this deep dive into Think Again?
I think the most important thing is to remember that rethinking is a skill. It's something we can all get better at with practice.
It's like a muscle. The more we use it, the stronger it gets.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So challenge yourself to think again about something you feel certain about. Seek out different perspectives and be open to the possibility that you might change your mind.
I love that challenge accepted.
And who knows, maybe you'll discover something amazing along the way.
That's the beauty of it, right?
Yeah.
You never know where rethinking might lead you.
Exactly.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into Think Again by Adam Grant. It's been a truly mind-expanding experience.
It has. Thanks for having me.
And to our listeners, keep those rethinking muscles flexed. We'll catch you next time. It feels like we've covered so much ground already: imposter syndrome, motivational interviewing, the happiness trap. But I have a feeling this is just the tip of the iceberg.
Oh, absolutely. Rethinking is a journey, not a destination. The more you practice it, the more you discover.
Yeah, for sure. I'm finding myself noticing those moments where I'm slipping into preacher mode or prosecutor mode. And now I can kind of catch myself and say, wait a minute, let me try to approach this with a bit more curiosity and humility.
It's like building a muscle.
Yeah.
The more you use it, the stronger it gets.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what are some ways that we can keep those rethinking muscles flexed even after this deep dive is over?
Well, Grant has this great exercise in the book where he challenges us to think back on those moments when we genuinely changed our minds about something important.
Okay.
Those times when we shifted our perspectives, abandoned old beliefs, and embraced new ways of seeing the world.
That's interesting. I'm already thinking back on my own life, trying to pinpoint those moments where I had a major shift in thinking.
Yeah, and as you reflect on those experiences, you might start to notice some patterns.
Like what kinds of patterns?
Well, maybe there are certain situations where you're more likely to dig in your heels. Or maybe there are certain people who always seem to challenge your thinking in a good way.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
By becoming aware of those patterns, you can start to experiment with different approaches.
Okay, so it's like becoming your own mental coach.
Exactly.
You're observing your thought patterns, and then you're trying to nudge yourself in a different direction.
And remember, rethinking isn't just about those big life-altering decisions.
Right.
It's also about those everyday micro moments of decision-making, those seemingly small choices that can actually have a big impact on our lives.
So it's about bringing that same level of curiosity and critical thinking to everything we do.
Yeah, to deciding what to have for dinner or to
Yeah.
choosing a career path or to just interacting with the people around us.
So it's really about cultivating a mindset of continuous rethinking,
Exactly. It's a habit you could develop.
a habit of questioning your assumptions, seeking out new information, and being open to the possibility that you might be wrong.
Even about those things you feel absolutely certain about.
It's almost like rethinking becomes a lifestyle,
I like that.
a way of approaching the world with a sense of wonder and curiosity, rather than just clinging to a fixed set of beliefs.
That's beautifully put. I think Grant would agree with that wholeheartedly.
I feel like this conversation has given me a whole new set of lenses through which to view the world.
That's what we were hoping for.
It's exciting, but also a little bit daunting, realizing that there's so much more to learn and so many ways that I can challenge my own thinking.
I think that's a good thing, though. It means you're growing.
Yeah,
And remember, the power of rethinking lies not in having all the answers,
right.
but in having the courage to question what you think you know, to embrace uncertainty, and to be open to the possibility that you might be wrong.
So letting go of that need to be right all the time
Exactly.
and embracing the beauty of not knowing.
I love that so much. Well, I think we've given our listeners plenty to chew on.
Yeah, it's been such a thought-provoking conversation. Thank you so much for sharing your insights on Think Again.
It's been a pleasure, and I hope everyone out there will pick up a copy of the book and start their own rethinking journey.
Yes, to our listeners, keep those rethinking muscles flexed, and we'll catch you next time for another deep dive.